In this video, I'm going to be talking about how the developmental screening questionnaire is structured. So we're going to take a look at a sample questionnaire real quickly, and I'm just going to have you look at the top portion of the screening questionnaire. This is the first part of every screening questionnaire. It's really important to notice this part. The big age right here where it says 16-month questionnaire, that's what we call the target age. But if you look at the teeny tiny little print right above there, what you're going to notice is that there's an age span, and that age span, as children get older, gets wider and wider and wider. And all of you who have been to screenings with me have heard me use the phrase that all children develop along a continuum of typical development, and that mastery at any point during that particular continuum is considered typical development. So the reason this is really important is that we know how quickly children develop skills. And so it really makes a huge difference when you are doing the screening questionnaire. So for instance, this 16-month questionnaire, when I look at that fine print at the top, the span that I look at is 15 months all the way through 16 months, 30 days. That's a 2-month time span, which is really huge at that particular age. So again, when you do the screening questionnaire with your child, you're going to really want to pay attention to how old your child is at the particular day that you're sitting down to doing the questionnaire. And if you happen to think, oh, I'm checking a lot of not yets or sometimes options rather than checking yeses, pay attention to how old your child actually is and where they fall on that continuum. As long as they're not at the very last day of that span, you can take that screening questionnaire and you can just put it aside. Take a deep breath and just play with your child. You can play all the same activities that show up in the screening questionnaire, but you don't actually need to complete it until the very last day before your child ages out. So we're always going to pay attention to that age range when we're looking at the results of a screening questionnaire. And like I said, if you try certain activities and you're starting to feel like you're getting frustrated, your child's getting frustrated, it's totally fine to put it to the side. So that age range is the first thing I want you to notice. The next thing I want you to notice when you look at your questionnaire, when you open it up to the first page, is you're going to see the beginnings of the 5 different developmental domains. So every screening questionnaire that you look at is going to have 5 developmental domains, and they're going to be exactly the same in every screening questionnaire in the exact same order. Communication is going to come first. Then we're going to look at gross motor, then we're going to look at fine motor, problem solving, and then personal social. So that's considered the developmental domain section. And I want to talk really briefly about each domain, and then I'll talk about how you respond to each question. So communication, when we look at it in this particular area, is going to be both expressive and receptive. So what your child is hearing and understanding, as well as the sounds that they're starting to make, the words that they're making, how they're putting words together. Gross motor are the large muscle groups, arms and legs and torso primarily. Fine motor, fingers, hands, and hand-eye coordination. The problem-solving category is covers a number of different things. It's really the cognitive domain, and it's going to be how your child is interacting with people and toys as they learn and acquire new skills. And the last category is called personal social, and that refers to a number of different things also. It has to do with self-regulation, the beginnings of some self-soothing behaviors. It also has to do a little bit with self-identity, and also some self-help skills. So there's quite a bit that's covered in that section. Now, every single developmental domain has you answer each question in the same way. Yes, sometimes, or not yet. A yes response means that your child does the behavior on a pretty regular basis. It doesn't mean that they necessarily do it on command when you want to take out the developmental screening and do it. It's really just looking at generally, does your child do this type of activity on a regular basis, as long as they're not really tired or cranky or hungry. And so that would be a yes response most of the time. A sometimes response means that your child has done this particular skill at least one time, but maybe no more than a handful of other times. And so again, it's not regularly, it's just from at least one time, even if the very first time they do it is when you take out that screening questionnaire and ask them to do it. That still counts as a sometimes response. The not yet response just means not yet. It doesn't mean that that skill isn't going to emerge. It just means that it hasn't happened yet. So those same 6 questions, the same exact options for responding. The other thing to keep in mind is that the questions themselves are arranged in hierarchical order. So questions 1 through 6, the easiest skill is question number 1. By the time we get to questions 5 and 6, then we are looking at the average skill for children of the target age. So what you may find is, especially if you're doing it on the early end of your screening questionnaire, is the first few questions are yeses and yeses, and then you get a couple sometimes, and then maybe you end with a not yet. That would be very, very normal because, again, they're hierarchical. The earliest questions 1 and 2, for the very beginning of the range, and by the time we get to 5 and 6, typically the average behaviors that we are seeing for a child of the target age. And again, the target age is the age right here. The overall section is what comes next. That's the last part of the questionnaire that you're going to be looking at. And this particular section addresses some areas that the domain section does not address. It's really about the quality of skills. It has to do also with any parent concerns. So there's a lot of questions that have to do with early learning, with early language development, things that aren't necessarily covered in the communication section. For example, hearing and articulation are addressed in the overall section. Articulation doesn't have anything to do with how many words your child is saying. It has to do with how well you can understand what your child is saying. The overall section at the end is just yes and no responses. And there's also a section for comments. And especially since we're doing mail homes now and not meeting in person while you're filling it out, any comments that you write down are going to be extra helpful to me as I score your screenings and get ready to have the video conference with you to discuss the results. The last 2 questions are concerning your behaviors that you might be concerned about, anything that's worrying you. But there's an extra question that I always add at the end of our time together that doesn't show up on the screening questionnaire. And I just want you to have it in your mind as something that you can write down in the section, the last question, if you have any worries. What I ask is, do you have anything that you just wanted to check in about? So it doesn't have to be a worry. It can be anything that you were just wondering about. And it's perfectly fine for you to write that down in this section. I'll look at it, and when we connect to discuss it, we can just talk about it. So it doesn't have to be a worry. It doesn't have to be a behavior concern. It can just be simply something that you're wondering about and you want to talk with me or Mary about when we coordinate with you after you send it back in. So those are the 3 different sections of your screening questionnaire: the age range, the developmental domains, and the overall section. Looking forward to talking with all of you soon.